In 1971, the life of a young woman from a small town in West Virginia was tragically cut short. Catherine Fitzgerald, a 22-year-old pre-med student at Marshall University, was known for her intelligence, warmth, and promising future. But in a turn of fate no one could have predicted, her life was taken, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. What started as a mysterious death would evolve into a case that would leave the community, and especially Catherine's family, grappling with uncertainty. Despite extensive investigations, no clear suspects emerged, and the case soon went cold. With no answers, her family was left to carry the heavy burden of grief, not knowing who was responsible for taking their loved one. Years passed, and the small town of Huntington, West Virginia, carried the unsettling truth that Catherine's killer remained unidentified. As the case faded from the headlines, the pain never faded for her family. They never gave up hope, always clinging to the possibility that justice would one day be served. For nearly 50 years, the mystery lingered, a quiet shadow over the town. What had seemed like a senseless act of violence soon became a haunting reminder of the case that refused to fade into history. The absence of closure weighed heavily on Catherine's family, and for them, every passing year without answers was a painful reminder of the tragedy. Then, in 2019, a breakthrough, an unexpected twist, shocked the entire community. Modern forensic science, specifically DNA matching, would bring forth the revelation that no one could have imagined. What was once a cold case buried in time was now a matter of uncovering the truth that had been hidden for so long. Through this remarkable development, the identity of Catherine's killer was finally revealed. The man who had evaded justice for nearly 5 decades had been living among them, undetected. This was not just a case of closure for Catherine's family, but a clear demonstration of how far forensic advancements had come, allowing for a long-awaited resolution. This is the story of Catherine Fitzgerald, a promising young woman whose life was taken far too soon, and the shocking discovery of the man who was finally held accountable for her death. Catherine Fitzgerald was a 22-year-old pre-med student at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia. She was well-liked for her intelligence, kindness, and determination. Her classmates knew her as someone who always gave her best, whether in the classroom, helping her peers, or in her dream of becoming a doctor. Catherine had a clear path ahead of her, a future built on years of hard work and ambition. Her family, particularly her mother Elizabeth, had watched Catherine grow from a bright child into a young woman who was ready to change the world. Catherine's dream of studying medicine was one shared by many in her family, who had always encouraged her to pursue her passions. Her life had purpose, it had direction, and for those who knew her, Catherine was someone who left an impact on everyone she met. The days leading up to March 16, 1971 were uneventful. Catherine was busy with her studies, preparing for exams, and meeting with friends. Like most college students, she was juggling the challenges of academics while looking forward to her future. On the evening of March 15th, Catherine spent time in the library and later spoke with a friend about her plans to study and prepare for the next day. She seemed focused, calm, and determined to continue pursuing her education. That morning, Catherine's absence raised concerns. Patricia Wilson, one of her closest friends, had made plans to meet Catherine for breakfast, but when she didn't show up, the worry began to grow. Patricia attempted to contact her, but there was no answer. Not like Catherine, not like the person who was always on time, always reliable. Patricia and a few others decided to check on her. When campus security arrived at Catherine's dorm room, they found the door unlocked and her room as it always had been, with no sign of a disturbance. But there was something unsettling about the scene, something that immediately told them this was not a simple case of a missed breakfast. Catherine was gone, and the answers were nowhere to be found. The mystery surrounding Catherine Fitzgerald's death would grow deeper as the years passed. What had happened to this promising young woman? And why was there no clear explanation? For her family, the pain was not just in the loss, but in the unanswered questions that lingered. They would spend decades searching for the truth, clinging to the hope that one day, someone would find the answers they so desperately needed. On the morning of March 16, 1971, the campus of Marshall University was like any other. The air was crisp, and students were beginning their daily routines. Catherine Fitzgerald, a 22-year-old pre-med student, had a busy schedule ahead. The night before, she had spent time in the library, reviewing her notes and preparing for upcoming exams. There was nothing unusual about her actions, just a dedicated student looking forward to another day of learning. However, by the time morning arrived, Catherine had become the center of an unfolding mystery. Patricia Wilson, a close friend of Catherine's, was waiting for her at their usual breakfast spot. But Catherine never showed up. At first it seemed like a simple mix-up. Perhaps Catherine had simply overslept or had a last-minute change of plans. But as time passed and Patricia couldn't reach her, concern began to grow. It was unlike Catherine to miss their meetups without an explanation. Patricia, unable to get through by phone, decided to visit Catherine's dorm room. Upon arriving, she found the door to Catherine's room unlocked, which in itself was unusual but not entirely out of the ordinary in a college dormitory. As Patricia stepped inside, she noticed nothing appeared out of place. Catherine's books were open on her desk, and her belongings were neatly arranged. However, something was off. There was an unsettling stillness in the air. Patricia began searching the room, calling Catherine's name, hoping for a response. When there was none, she immediately contacted campus security. Within minutes, the authorities arrived and began to examine the situation. They searched the room carefully, trying to make sense of what had happened. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but the absence of Catherine and the lack of any clear explanation was deeply troubling. The investigation began swiftly, but there were no immediate answers. No signs of a struggle, no indication of foul play. It was as if Catherine had simply vanished into thin air. As the hours passed, more investigators arrived, and the search for Catherine intensified. They spoke with friends, classmates, and professors, all of whom described Catherine as a dedicated and responsible student. No one could offer any insight into why she might have disappeared, nor was there any reason to believe she had left voluntarily. Authorities turned to the dorm building, searching every corner of the campus, but no trace of Catherine was found. Local law enforcement, now fully involved, continued their investigation, reaching out to the broader community for any possible leads. What started as a missing person case soon turned into a full-scale mystery. Catherine Fitzgerald had vanished without a trace, and the questions were mounting. Where had she gone? Who could have taken her? And why? For Catherine's family, the emotional toll was unimaginable, but they held on to the hope that the answers would eventually come. As the investigation continued, it became increasingly clear that this was not going to be an easy case to solve. What had seemed like a routine college morning was now the beginning of a mystery that would haunt not only Catherine's family, but an entire community for decades to come. The mystery surrounding Catherine Fitzgerald's death, which had gone unsolved for decades, began to unravel with the advancement of forensic science. For years, investigators had searched for answers, but the case remained cold, with little more than questions and frustration. The crime that had once shocked a community was now fading into the distant past, overshadowed by time. Then, in 2019, a breakthrough arrived, not from traditional investigative methods, but from modern forensic technology. As the case was reopened, investigators turned to DNA analysis, a method that had revolutionized the way law enforcement solved cold cases. The crucial evidence, long stored and seemingly useless, was now the key to unlocking the truth. The evidence collected from Catherine's dorm room years earlier, samples of hair and bloodstains, had been preserved in the hopes that, someday, forensic advances might make it possible to identify her killer. Though the technology of 1971 wasn't capable of such detailed analysis, new techniques were now available that could bring clarity to a case that had long been dormant. Through genetic genealogy, a method that utilizes publicly available DNA databases to trace family connections, investigators began searching for a match. This emerging technique had already helped solve other cold cases across the country, and now it was being used to unlock the mystery of Catherine's murder. Investigators uploaded the DNA from the crime scene into the database, hoping to find a distant relative of the suspect. After an intense search, the breakthrough finally came. The DNA matched that of David Kowalski, a man who had been living in the same area where Catherine's murder occurred. Kowalski, a well-known teacher and coach in the local community, had never been on the radar of investigators, despite the years that had passed since Catherine's death. The news of the DNA match was both shocking and astonishing. Kowalski, who had been living quietly in the town, had been completely unknown to the case until this moment. The revelation that someone so familiar to the community could be involved in such a crime left many grappling with disbelief. How could someone who had been trusted by so many, a respected educator, be responsible for something so terrible? As authorities moved forward with the arrest, they delved deeper into Kowalski's past. He had been a familiar face in the local schools and community events. He was the kind of person who had been involved with youth sports and educational programs, someone who had earned the respect of both his peers and students. But as the investigation continued, questions began to arise about his relationship with Catherine. Had they crossed paths before? Was there something in his history that had been overlooked? Kowalski's arrest was the turning point in a case that had been frozen in time for nearly 50 years. His identity as the killer of Catherine Fitzgerald shocked everyone who knew him. How could this man, who had built his life around teaching and serving the community, be the same person responsible for the tragic death of a young woman all those years ago? The breakthrough wasn't just a revelation for Catherine's family. It was a testament to the power of modern technology. It showed how advances in DNA testing and genetic research had the potential to bring justice to cases that had long been abandoned. It also proved that even the most unsolvable mysteries could eventually find answers, thanks to the persistence of law enforcement and the evolving tools at their disposal. The emotional impact of this discovery was immense. For Catherine's family, the decades of unanswered questions were finally answered. They had spent years wondering who was responsible for their loss, and now they had the name. But there was more to the story than just the arrest. The truth behind the crime, the motivations of the killer, and the long road to justice were all yet to be uncovered. This forensic breakthrough was just the beginning of a long process that would reveal not only the truth about Catherine's murder, but also the complexity of the investigation that had been decades in the making. The arrest of David Kowalski in connection with Catherine Fitzgerald's death sent shockwaves through the community. For decades, the case had remained a haunting mystery, with no clear answers or suspects. But in 2019, a breakthrough in forensic science finally pointed to Kowalski, a man who had lived in the same area as Catherine and who, for years, had been a respected figure in the town. Kowalski, a high school teacher and coach, was well known in the local community. He had worked with children and been a trusted member of various local programs. To those around him, he was an ordinary man, someone who was seen as reliable and approachable. But as the DNA evidence began to surface, it became clear that Kowalski was anything but ordinary. The forensic breakthrough came when investigators re-examined the case using genetic genealogy, a method that had already helped solve several cold cases. DNA evidence collected from Catherine's dorm room, which had been preserved for years, was now subjected to modern testing. This evidence, once considered a lost lead, was the key to revealing the identity of the killer. Through genetic matching, investigators discovered a family connection that led them to Kowalski. The match was confirmed, and Kowalski's identity as the prime suspect was clear. As investigators closed in on him, the community was left stunned. How could a man who had been trusted by so many for so long be the one responsible for a crime that had gone unsolved for decades? The arrest was made, and Kowalski was taken into custody. His reaction, according to those involved, was one of disbelief and denial. He maintained his innocence throughout the process, but the evidence was irrefutable. The DNA match was precise, and Kowalski's name had now become synonymous with the crime that had haunted the town for almost 50 years. The news of his arrest was a bitter pill for the community to swallow. How could someone who had spent years working with young people and leading a life of service to others be capable of such a crime? This revelation raised more questions than answers, and the community was left grappling with the realization that someone they had known for years was involved in the murder. For Catherine's family, the arrest was a moment of both relief and sorrow. After years of searching for answers, they had finally found the truth, but it came at a great emotional cost. The man responsible for their daughter's death had been hiding in plain sight, and the revelation of his identity was as shocking as it was painful. Yet for them, the truth was a crucial step toward justice, a justice that had taken decades to arrive. Kowalski's arrest marked the end of a long and painful chapter in the investigation, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where the pieces of the mystery began to fall into place. The killer had been identified, but the full picture of what had led to Catherine's death was still unclear. The investigation was far from over, and the story was far from complete. As the trial of David Kowalski unfolded, the courtroom became the stage for a drama that had been decades in the making. For Catherine Fitzgerald's family, the trial was the culmination of years of pain, uncertainty, and unanswered questions. What had started as a missing persons case, then a cold murder investigation, had now led to this moment, the day they would finally see justice. But it was far from an easy victory. Kowalski, once a respected teacher and coach in the community, now found himself on the other side of the courtroom. His role as a well-known local figure made his arrest and subsequent trial even more shocking. It was hard to reconcile the image of the man who had been seen coaching local sports teams and teaching students with the man now accused of taking a young life. His demeanor throughout the trial was calm, but his defense team vigorously challenged the evidence that had led to his arrest. The defense team's primary argument was that the DNA evidence, though groundbreaking, was not entirely foolproof. They questioned the methodology behind the genetic genealogy that had connected Kowalski to the crime, suggesting that the process could have errors. However, the prosecution's case was strong, built on the genetic evidence, the tireless investigation that had gone on for decades, and the fact that Kowalski had never been considered a suspect until the DNA match. It was clear to the jury that the breakthrough had been legitimate and irrefutable. Witnesses took the stand, including former colleagues of Kowalski, who spoke about his character. They described a man who was viewed as dependable and trustworthy, someone who had earned the respect of his peers. For many, it was a devastating moment to hear such praise for a man who, it now seemed, had lived with a hidden truth for years. The emotional weight of the trial was not lost on Catherine's family, who sat in the courtroom every day, hoping for a resolution. They had long struggled with the uncertainty of Catherine's death, never knowing who was responsible. Now, the identity of the killer was clear, and the focus was on ensuring that justice was served. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Kowalski was found guilty of murder. For Catherine's family, the decision brought a sense of closure, though the emotional toll was undeniable. They had fought for this moment for years, and it was finally here. The judge handed down the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was the justice Catherine's family had hoped for, but it didn't bring back the years they had lost. It didn't erase the pain of Catherine's absence, but it marked the end of a long search for answers. Kowalski, after hearing the sentence, showed no immediate reaction. His defense team had attempted to appeal the verdict, arguing that there had been inconsistencies in the trial process, but the evidence against him remained strong. Catherine's family had their answers, and the town of Huntington could now begin to process the reality of what had been hidden for so long. The trial, while ending in conviction, left a lingering sense of discomfort. It was one thing to know that justice had been served. It was another to understand the emotional toll that such a discovery could have on a community. Kowalski's arrest and conviction, though providing some form of closure, also marked the beginning of a new chapter in the lives of those who had been left behind. For Catherine's family, the fight was over. The questions had been answered. but the scars would remain. They had sought justice for decades, and though it had been a difficult road, they could finally begin to move forward, knowing that the truth was now clear. The arrest and conviction of David Kowalski in connection with Catherine Fitzgerald's death brought a form of resolution to a case that had haunted the community for almost 50 years. While the trial provided legal closure, the emotional wounds remained. Catherine's family had endured years of heartache, wondering who had taken their daughter, and the trial was a bittersweet moment of justice. It was a victory in the fight for answers, but it could never undo the pain of her loss. Catherine's parents had spent years living with uncertainty. They had witnessed the passing of decades, hoping for a break in the case. But until the breakthrough in 2019, the mystery remained. For them, Kowalski's conviction was both a relief and a reminder of the time lost. A reminder that while the truth had been found, it came at the cost of years of suffering. As parents, no verdict could fully heal the absence left by their daughter's death. In the town of Huntington, where Catherine had grown up, the shock of Kowalski's arrest reverberated through every corner. He had been a trusted figure, someone the community had respected. To learn that this man, known for his involvement with young people and his role as a local coach, was connected to such a tragedy was almost too much to process. People were left questioning how someone they had trusted could be capable of something so terrible. The revelations challenged the town's trust in the very institutions that had shaped their lives. The local school district, where Kowalski had worked for years, faced difficult questions about how they had failed to notice any signs of the man's hidden side. He had been a fixture in the lives of countless students, and now the community was left grappling with the unsettling realization that they had been unknowingly close to a dark truth for decades. For law enforcement, the case served as a reminder of the evolving power of forensic science. The application of genetic genealogy had allowed investigators to bring the case to a close, showing just how far forensic methods had come. The use of DNA analysis to solve cold cases had proven invaluable in bringing justice to families like Catherine's. While the scientific advances were impressive, they also underscored the sadness of the years lost before the case was solved. Despite the finality of Kowalski's conviction, the community's wounds would not heal overnight. Catherine's death was a tragedy, and while justice had been served, the scars of the past would always remain. The emotional toll on Catherine's family was profound. They had been denied the opportunity to see their daughter grow, to watch her pursue her dreams. While the truth had emerged, it did little to fill the void her absence had created. Yet, Catherine's story is not only about the pain of her loss. Her case stands as a testament to the resilience of those who seek justice, even when it seems impossible. The persistence of her family and law enforcement, combined with advancements in forensic science, led to a resolution that was once thought unattainable. Her legacy, though forever shaped by tragedy, would inspire those who work tirelessly to uncover the truth in other unsolved cases. The case of Catherine Fitzgerald, though a painful chapter in the history of Huntington, would remain a reminder of the importance of never giving up on the search for answers. While the arrest of David Kowalski marked the end of the case, it also marked a new beginning, one where the tools of modern science and the determination of individuals could uncover the truth, no matter how long it took. The resolution of David Kowalski's trial brought some semblance of closure to a case that had haunted the town of Huntington for nearly 50 years. For Catherine Fitzgerald's family, the conviction marked the end of an agonizing search for the truth, but it did little to fill the void left by her absence. The pain of losing a daughter, a sister, would never fade, but the answers they had longed for had finally come. For years, Catherine's parents had lived in uncertainty. The absence of answers had been a constant weight on their hearts, and every day without closure was a reminder of the grief they carried. When Kowalski was arrested and charged with her murder, it was a bitter relief. The justice they had been fighting for had been achieved, but the emotional toll of the years spent in the dark was not so easily erased. Catherine's death had left a lasting scar on the community. She had been a bright, promising student, a daughter to a loving family, and a friend to many. Her murder had cast a shadow over the town, and for decades, there had been a collective sense of disbelief that the killer had never been found. Kowalski's arrest, coming so many years later, left the townspeople grappling with uncomfortable truths. How could someone who had been so deeply embedded in the fabric of their community, someone who had been trusted with the lives of their children, be responsible for such a crime? The revelation left many questioning how they could have been blind to the darkness that had existed right under their noses. For the local school district, the impact was profound. Kowalski had been a teacher and coach for years, someone who had built relationships with students and parents alike. The fact that such a figure could have concealed a deadly secret for so long was difficult for many to accept. The revelation that he was responsible for Catherine's death caused a profound shift in the way the community viewed him and, by extension, the institutions that had allowed him to remain in their midst. At the same time, the case highlighted the incredible power of modern forensic science. The use of genetic genealogy in solving the case had been a pivotal moment in the investigation. What had once seemed like an unsolvable mystery was finally brought to light through advances in technology. The case of Catherine Fitzgerald became a poignant example of how forensic science could finally provide the answers that families like hers had waited for. DNA analysis had brought closure, but it also underscored how much time had been lost in the pursuit of justice. As the years passed, the emotional impact of the case continued to ripple through the community. Kowalski's conviction had put an end to the legal battle, but it had done little to heal the wounds left behind. Catherine's family had finally found the truth, but they could never get back the years they had lost. The case may have concluded in a courtroom, but for Catherine's loved ones, the journey to healing was just beginning. Though her life had been tragically cut short, Catherine's legacy lived on. Her story was one of perseverance, of a family who never gave up hope, of investigators who refused to let the case go cold, and of a community that, despite the darkness of the crime, eventually found justice. Catherine Fitzgerald's memory would remain in the hearts of those who knew her, and her case would serve as a reminder of the enduring power of truth, no matter how long it takes to uncover. Her story was not just about the tragic loss of a life. It was about the pursuit of justice and the lengths to which people will go to find answers. Even after so many years, the truth was finally revealed. And in the end, that truth brought a sense of closure to a case that had long seemed impossible to solve.